in South Mogadishu, the problem for UN forces has been controlling the streets.
The Pentagon says ID's network of support has been badly weakened now that several of his advisors have been taken prisoner. That makes grabbing him even more difficult, no matter how well trained American troops may be.
This is the Gear.Locker, and it's time to build a Delta kit. Easy? No. Cheap? Also no. But extremely rewarding, so much fun to build, and some of the coolest vibes out there? You bet. With this video, a bunch of reference photos, and a secret that I'll reveal to you at the end, my hope is that you'll be able to build the Delta kit from the Battle of Mogadishu for your very own self. And there's a lot to it, but keep in mind, this guide is meant to get you a step ahead. It's not going to be 100% comprehensive for every single piece of nylon and cotton and plastic that was seen during the battle. So take everything that I say and know that you can modify or change it to a bit of your own liking. But with that being said, let's jump right into the base layers. The uniform is the 3-color desert DCU, and it was the primary uniform for a ton of US Army operations during this time period. Now there's two different styles that were around by 1993. There's the full cotton twill, or there's the ripstop style. And you can't exactly decipher which one was exactly used during the operation, so I tend to go for the earlier twill style. And this goes for the top and the bottoms. But the top is something special. Delta operators in this time frame would modify their uniforms in the classic raid mod style, as seen as early as US paratroopers in World War II to MACV-SOG during Vietnam. They would take their lower pockets, move them to the top, and take the top pockets and move them to the arms. These are a very particular modification, and while not everybody did it, the majority of them did. Here's a couple things you need to know if you want to raid mod your own. And number one is keeping those pockets straight. No crazy angles or fancy things were done to the pocket. They were kept perfectly straight up and down, including on the arms. And what you'll also notice on the arms is some Velcro. This can be in green, tan, coyote brown, or even black. And sometimes it's a small rectangular panel to keep a flag, or it's a large square. However, you'll never see Velcro on the pocket flap, only on the pocket portion itself. And here you'll see one of two things, or sometimes both. A US flag with the reverse style, stars going forward, and of course, your glint tape. This was sewn onto some Velcro and slapped right onto it. Now, if you didn't want to raid mod your uniform, keeping the flag patch there is pretty important. Whether you sew that directly on or just a Velcro square like I have on this one here, that's all you're gonna need really. And also, sometimes you'll see name tape spots. They're usually covered by the TG Faust vests, which we'll get to, but you don't necessarily need to do it if you just want to emulate the look overall. But again, it was seen, so it's up to you if you want to tackle that. And before we move down to the trousers and boots and all, let's talk about the undershirts. These are your standard USGI coyote brown undershirts used by forces all throughout the 80s and 90s. Not any of the modern UCP or TAN 499, the dark coyote brown. You'll often see that these don't have a physical tag, but a stamp where a rear tag would be. And okay, let's jump down. The pants had no crazy modifications whatsoever, but the belts can be custom. The trouser belts are sometimes BDU belts, but more often than not, they are rigger-made belts. These have a simple buckle and allow the parachute-style strap to weave right through and back into the belt loops. This can be in a myriad of colors, including black, tan, coyote, or OD green, similar to the Velcro. Just depends on what the riggers had on hand at the time or what the operator wanted. I will say those tan colors and some of the greens are more common than not though. And at the base of the pants are the boots. You have a couple of options for these as well. The most notorious, being the hardest to find and also not as commonly seen, are the Adidas GSG9 boots. Again, these are very expensive and were known to fall apart very quickly. And to be honest, as I mentioned, they weren't really seen that much. The ones that were seen far more commonly were the standard desert combat boots. These had either the dark chocolate soles or the lighter tan ones, but these were the Panama style soles, not any of the modern iterations that came afterwards. Sometimes you'll see these different sole colors side by side in reference photos, so really whatever you find, but I tend to lean towards the chocolate colored ones. Those are just a little bit cooler. And now let's jump to the next wearable non-armor piece, and that's the helmet. As you know, the ProTech helmet is by far one of the coolest helmets that operators have ever used, but it didn't offer any ballistic protection. And while I did do a whole video, I'm gonna give you the quick rundown on just the basics of what you want in a helmet. Number one, you want an 80s style ProTech helmet, or at least very early 90s. Throughout the 90s, they changed their design quite a bit. Essentially, you want the 80s donut hole style rivets with a semi-squared off cutout and the chin strap buckles on a D-ring. This is all black and sanded around to give it a more matte color. This commercial off-the-shelf item is just one of many seen in Delta's hands. And different to the Panama engagements that they had, they've updated the helmets with some cool features, such as your Anvis 6 NVG mount on the front and an Anvis 6 battery pack in the back. Originals of this can be very hard to find, of both of them. So 3D printed options for the battery pack and FMA or reproduction or even Anvis 9 mounts for the front will usually suffice for a kit. But again, if you can find an Anvis 6 set, that's what you want to go for. Next piece of electronics you'll usually see at the top of the helmet is an SDU-5E strobe. These strobes usually had an IR filter cover on the front and were painted black or covered in OD green tape. I often found that the labels were left uncovered, which is kind of interesting because they were getting taped up anyway, but I guess it's because you got to return it. So get an SDU-5E strobe. They weren't seen on every single guy's helmet, but they were very common, especially when going out on operations. And next, before we get to the headsets, let's talk about the goggles. The standard SWDGs, the sand, wind, and dust goggles, are going to be by far the most common ones you'll see. However, Delta did favor some of the Boley X500s. These have a couple different versions, but they're all the clear lens. The version that is more common has a white rim on the inside. I believe this is some kind of dual pane thing, but fact check me on that in the comments. But you can also get one that doesn't have the white rim, and it kind of just sits a little further out. That's fine, they both are seen in the kit. Oh, and speaking of eyewear, if you want to get the Oakley razor blades, get the ones with the straight arms. Those trigger style arms come after, and they're just so freaking cool. Delta wears Oakleys. All right, now let's jump to that headset. The headset options can be very challenging to find. The most notorious and the one that everyone seems to rave about is the Setcom 5 headset. This was a standard racing style or aviatronics headset that was just modified to work with their push-to-talks. Sometimes, like in my example, it actually comes with a push-to-talk already attached. But again, most of the time I've seen these modified. And on the silver arm of the Setcom 5s, you'll want to tape that up. There are a couple photos of guys with them untaped, but the majority had them covered so they weren't shining in the lights. Another very common option you have is the Davies Task 1 headset. There are differences between some of the old ones and the modern ones, but again, Task 1 is what you're going to want to look for. I've seen black with green mesh on the inside. I've seen fully green. The options that you find may be particular to your kit, but the Task 1 is notorious and you see it all over the place. Another option you have that's less common is going to be the throat mic system. These are custom modified RAF throat mics, and often they were worn with the full ear helmets, something that came from the Panama stuff. And you can add a headset piece right into the integrated ear cover, so it's kind of already there every time you put it on. Just clip the throat mic around your neck and you're good. But another option that is seen way less commonly, but still is a much cheaper option out there, is the Astrocom 10355B. This was seldom seen, but again, is far cheaper and was usually adapted to a single ear style. As you'll notice, none of the headsets that Delta wore covered both ears. But this same thing plugged right into the PTT, which, by the way, since we're on it, I'll talk about that now. The PTT and radio setup go into the chest rig and vest setup and everything, but I'll mention it here. You're gonna want a Motorola MX300 radio. There is a photo where a shiny bit of silver is poking out of a radio pouch, which kind of indicates that you can have any of the MX300 series radios, so like 300, 340, 350, that kind of thing. But again, the standard black one is going to be by far the most common. And oftentimes, this attached to the U91 PTT. This one is different from the modern ones in that instead of having two silver screws on either side to attach the body pieces together, there was only one on each side. Oh yeah, and on that helmet setup, you also see tape and Velcro locking things down, and a little bit of glint tape too, so feel free to get creative with it. But with that being said, let's jump down to the body armor and the vests. This is some of the fun stuff. The body armor used by Delta during this operation was the TG Faust NATO SF style body armor. This was modified in Delta fashion up the wazoo sometimes, but the standard modifications included Velcro going all the way down, a couple of strap hangers, and maybe some modifications to the cummerbund. It wasn't on every single one, but at least those basic modifications were there on most. Of course, you'll see that bright American flag slapped right in the middle of it, but that also wasn't always there either. It is a cool look though and just screams Delta. Now finding an original of this is near impossible, and if you do, I don't think you're going to want to be wearing it out to your local kit picture day. So instead, finding reproductions like those from Squadron Sew Shop are going to be your best bet. You can also get the Shekin gears, which is a commercially available option, but there are some stitching things that I have concerns with personally, and if you just use a Sharpie, you can kind of mitigate some of those. But again, I talk about that a little bit more in the other video of mine, so go check that out too. And on pretty much every single Delta operator that was there during the Battle of Mogadishu, you'll find the AWS Strike Vest. This vest is a 4 magazine, 2 radio holding, 4 pistol mag holding, and tons of straps and weird things going on chest rig that was used by Delta. This is in all black, although you will see some of the Gen 1 style ones in tan. Stay tuned for a video on that soon. In these, you'll find your rifle magazine. Sometimes they are taped so they can be pulled out easier, but you'll also find them just barren in these chest rigs. And while on one side you'll have your radio, which we mentioned was the Motorola MX300, on the other side you can fit kind of whatever you need in there. What I like to fit in mine and what I see in some other guys' kits is some zip tie cuffs. Of course, for capturing those warlord leaders. And hanging off of the chest rig and many, many photos are the M116A1 flash crashes. I have some reproductions here, which of course we're going to talk about in another video, so stay tuned because these are actually a custom project from Stripes Airsoft and myself. And they've actually got some good weight to them too. And by the way, if you're running a strike vest, which for this kit you probably should be, please do not clip it into your TG Faust vest. Not a single photo in the Battle of Mogadishu did that. So despite what any other YouTuber or guide may say, there is no pictorial evidence. There's like one piece of evidence that was confirmed by GMB Solutions of a guy that had some clips on his, but there was never a picture of a chest rig attached directly to that. So just take that note for your own kit. Okay, but what if you don't want to run the AWS or rigger style strike vest? You do have another option or two. Sometimes you'll see the load bearing vests, those woodland ones that had the magazines going at weird angles and everything. Those do show up in a couple of photos. Sometimes you'll also see custom chest rigs as well. These are more than likely rigger made ones. So I can't exactly pinpoint you to a good reproduction or someone who can, but if I were to say anyone could, it's Squadron So Shop. So maybe reach out to him if you want to be one of those special one-on-one boys. And while we're on the topic of special one-on-one boys, let's talk about those breachers. While we'll get to the armament soon, you'll often see shotgun shells on the shoulder pads and on the belts, sometimes attached to the lower portion of the TG Faust vest. And these are custom rigger made pieces as well. Let's jump down to the next piece of load bearing equipment, and that is the duty belt. Once again, I made a whole video showing you how I set up mine, but the basics are gonna be this. You'll want a rigger made duty belt, which is a close approximation to the vintage Eagle Industries ones, with those Nexus SR buckles, or the ACW hardware ones too. These 2-inch wide buckles had some Velcro on the inside, some thick webbing to keep it all supported, and adjustability on the front. These housed a few different varieties of pouches, and you can kind of set this up how you want. However, some that I see on almost every belt setup include the double AWS or rigger style magazine pistol pouches, a canteen cover, sometimes like a 2-quart in this photo is being used to hold a gas mask, and just standard Alice M16 pouches. You do have some other options like the Eagle Industries Beta C magazine pouches. Those are kind of cool and not always seen, but they definitely show up. And of course, standard Alice pouches are kind of around, so you can throw those onto it and it wouldn't look too out of place. Like for example, on mine, I have an Alice saw pouch. This is seen very commonly with the Ranger guys, so I kind of adopted that for my Delta kit. Now, something that is not really commonly seen at all is a standard Alice belt with a bunch of Alice pouches on it. So if you want to do sort of a budget one, try to avoid that trope because really, again, it's only 1 or 2 guys that had that belt with all the magazine pouches and canteen pouches. That's more leaning towards the Ranger side of things. If I were you, I would avoid that personally. But also on the belt is the holster. Now there's 2 main holsters that Delta used during this time period. One of them is the AWS rigger style holster, which is a drop leg style that is pretty floppy. But it does the job, holds a magazine, and kind of just works. Which is why a lot of guys went for the Safariland 3004 holsters. These are rigid, solid platforms which keep the pistol strongly attached to your thigh. And while they did include 2 straps for it, 1 strap is all you need. And that's of course the lower, larger one with the buckle. But it is kind of cool if you have both. While Squadron So Shop can make the AWS rigger style holsters, the Safariland 3004s are very hard to come by. So keep a keen eye out, but if you see a good deal, just let me know, please. I've been looking for one for a cheap price for forever. And now let's jump on to those general accessories before we get to all the rifles and all of the conversation with that. But for your Delta kit, there are key things that are going to elevate it to the next level. Number 1, being correct patches and details and not overdoing it. As you heard me talk about in this video, there's only 2 style of patches, the American flag and the glint tape. But the next one that really stands out in a kit is the knee pad and sometimes the elbow pad situation. There are 2 common brands that were used by Delta during the time period. One being the Bike USA knee pads, which doubled as elbow pads, and they're the long black ones with some white trim, although I have seen black trim as well, and the Alta knee pads. Alta is still a company that's around and making knee pads and elbow pads and all that, but there's a particular style you're gonna wanna get. For the knee pads, get ones that don't attach with a buckle, a Y triangle style buckle, but a Velcro piece that goes all the way to the front and top and bottom of the knee pad. Same with the elbow pads. You can also notice there's a little white and blue Alta tag sticking out right out front. And as always with this kit, that's very difficult to find sometimes, so just keep an eye out. I have seen people that modify generic knee pads to kind of emulate those. They get it all black, they paint the grommets black, and they attach a little white tag, which I applaud that because truthfully, it's very hard to find one of those Alta knee pads in good condition, let alone two. Another detail is particular for those breacher boys. Oftentimes they carried a shotgun with them, so attaching it to your belt with a sling and kind of a homemade weapons catch is going to be a great way to go to really emulate that cool look. But also there is a drop leg pouch made by AWS that the design is almost still kind of made exactly the same by them in black that was carrying charges. So you can find that as well and really get that breacher kit looking snazzy. Which leads me to my last note about the fun details like that, is think about the job you would have. Whether you were a team leader or a breacher or what general things you would carry on a mission that they were in. Like I mentioned, those zip cuffs, those are fantastic and they're bright white so they really stand out. And they show that you're putting a little more effort into it. Extra magazines, grenades, things like that are gonna help elevate your kit as well. So try to include those on your kit in realistic fashions. And okay, let's get to those rifles. There's a whole bunch that we could talk about, but I'm gonna walk you through the basics of this. And before we get there, I do want to say, for certain things like these flash crashes, my Patreon subscribers are already getting access to these decals and things like that. Different stickers and things that I use for my personal loadouts and kits, you guys can have access to by checking out the Patreon, as well as exclusive videos that I put up just for you guys. So go check it out, and thank you to all the Patreon and YouTube channel members that are here. I've been messing around enough, let's get to that Colt 723, which again, is going to have a couple of variations. And truthfully, both are seen. The early model has an A1 style upper with a pencil barrel. It is an A2 lower, so you kind of get a mishmash of kits there. But moving on to the later variant, that A2 lower is sustained, but this time has a C7 upper, and more often than not, a government profile barrel, which was used to attach grenade launchers. Accessorizing these rifles is so much fun. You're going to want an MGW rail mount, a Weaver mount to be specific, for your Aimpoint 3000 or 5000. Both of those optics were around during the time and both were seen. There is actually a photo, I believe, of a 2000 being used, but I wouldn't exactly trust that that's going to be a great option to use. Just try to find a 3000 or 5000. And if I'm wrong on that, like that's one of the PJ guys, just ignore me, I'm sorry. You're also going to want to have a flashlight, either a Laser Products 6P or early Surefire 660. These are bolted to the handguard and never on the barrel. You can either have it at one of the angled positions up top or right on the bottom, mounted with a small Weaver rail, I believe I used the 61M, and a split vertical ring. You can use the pressure pad system for it, but oftentimes they were kind of just left attached. And on the front, you're going to want a Surefire IR filter. These were taped on and to prevent just standard lighting when you don't need it, and it doesn't give away your position if you have something covering it. Especially because at the time, Delta was the only one using nods on that operation. You didn't have to worry about Somalians seeing the IR light going off. You'll also sometimes find, though, the Ready Mag system. The early Ready Mag was a common thing that came after they tried using the duct tape and the cardboard and even the metal mag couplers. So this is an option that was seen on a good number of rifles. Not required and not on all of them, but a cool one nonetheless. Oh yeah, and speaking of cool things, if you have your 2-position buffer tube, drill another hole right where it's going to be for a comfortable length of pull when you have your body armor on. That's a common modification that they had the armorers do for them. So instead of a 2-position, you're upgrading to a 3-position. And one of them is custom. Another really cool accessory that you can use is an AIM-1D laser. This is very expensive and can be mounted in a couple of different ways, but oftentimes I see it mounted to the carry handle and that small hole up top with a separate mounting bracket system. But barrel mounts do exist for this AIM-1D laser as well. And lastly, on the rifle, you can use a sling. Sometimes you'll find custom ones, but more often than not, you're gonna get that USGI Slick Silent Sling, which is the long black one. The pistol is going to be a modified 1911. There are a ton of variations to this, but oftentimes it's got standard wood grips that don't have any of the triangles or diamonds on them, a Wilson Combat Extended flared magwell, bumpers on the base of the magazines, and your choice of sight, whether the Wilson style or the Novak style. Slides can also be standard USGI with the vertical serrations at the rear or the slanted serrations as well if you want to get fancy. And I'm sure there's other things that I'm missing in here, so if you know more about the pistols than I do, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to keep learning. I've got a pretty good build myself, but it's just emulating photos, so I want to hear what details you've got on yours. And speaking of fun, cool weapons like a pistol, they did also carry some other style of weapons. Like the M249 saw was a common piece used with a few Delta operators during the operation. In fact, there's a video clip of one running by a news camera with this saw. It's kind of cool. As I mentioned, for my breachers, you have the Remington M870 shotgun. That is a full stock style shotgun, but you can also get the 870 Sage International kit that attaches to the underbarrel. It's not a master key, but Sage International. And you can also use an M14. Delta Force had snipers up in the little birds surrounding during the battle and providing overwatch. So the M14, while made famous by Shugart, was also seen with other Delta members. And you can also run an M203 grenade launcher. That wasn't super common, but it definitely was there. And if you stayed this long, you deserve to know that secret that I was talking about in the very beginning of this video. I had a full reference sheet pulled up right next to me. And that's because I made a kit guide for this. Not only do I talk about the video, and you can watch this as many times as you want, but I've attached a document in the description below where you can read and see photo evidence of all of these in actual reference pictures. Keep in mind, it's a working document, so as things change or I get new information, of course it'll be updated. And if I'm missing anything, let me know. But that kit document is there for you to get the next best step into this kit. As well as adjacent to that, I also have a Delta reference album. These are reference photos that I found particularly useful for building the kit. Some of them are a little far away and hard to see, but a lot of them are really up close and pretty darn clear for the time. And all of that is available to you for sticking around to this point in the video. Thank you so much. And with that being said, I hope you've enjoyed this showcase of how to build a Delta Force loadout for the Battle of Mogadishu. Everyone knows the history and everyone's seen Black Hawk Down, and hopefully you watched my Farbisms video from last week where we talk all about the things that people get wrong. So with that being said, my yapping is over. I really appreciate you guys sticking to the end, and I hope you want to see some more Delta stuff. We have particular kit videos of this coming in the near future, as well as stuff from the 80s Delta kits. So as always, this is the Gear.Locker. Thanks for sticking by me. See you guys in the Moog and the next video that we're talking about Delta Force.
All right, now let's do something tactical.
Honestly,
keep it rolling if you want.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'll splice all of it together. You want to go low, I'll go high? Sure. All right. All right, on the count of three, we're going to move. Okay. All right, just move straight across. Liam can keep the camera there or follow. 3, 2, 1, go.